In the scorching silence of the desert, Emily swore she would never give her heart to another man. But destiny wanted her on her knees and sent to her door an Apache with eyes black as night and hands strong enough to rebuild what solitude had destroyed. He asked her for nothing. He simply took her, for the child he desired, for the forbidden love he would never confess. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe here to the channel and comment what you think. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance that no one dared to live. In the heart of the Texas Panhandle, where the relentless sun burns the red earth and secrets hide among the mesquite trees and century-old ranches, Emily carried her own life like a burden made of shame and wounded pride. At 35 years old, daughter of a traditional family from Dallas who had lost everything in a bad cattle speculation, she found herself forced to accept the position of teacher at the rural school in Harmony, a forgotten district in the middle of nowhere, where adobe houses scattered like scars across the vastness of the plain. She had arrived there 3 years before, bringing only 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Her husband, a respected lawyer from the capital, had left her for an intern 20 years younger, taking with him not only Emily's dreams, but also the house, the car, and even the little mutt she loved so much. His words still echoed in her mind like whiplashes. "You were never woman enough for me, Emily, dry inside and out." The accusation of infertility, pronounced with calculated cruelty, had been the final blow in a union that had been dead for a long time. Now, sitting on the porch of the small house that the county had provided her, Emily watched the lazy movement of the afternoon. The children had gone home from school, their voices still echoing in the dirt courtyard, and she allowed herself these few minutes of solitude before correcting the English tests. The heat was suffocating, even with the ceiling fans spinning slowly, and she had opened the first 3 buttons of her white blouse, feeling the sweat trickling between her breasts. There was no one to see anyway. In that place, she was just the town teacher, a serious and distant woman whom the residents respected, but with whom they never truly got close. That's when she heard him. The sound of hooves on the dirt road announced someone's arrival, and Emily raised her eyes, shielding them with her hand to see against the afternoon sun. The rider approaching was mounted on an imposing animal, a quarter horse with chestnut coat that danced with elegance despite the heat. But it was the man who made her hold her breath. Jackson River was 32 years old and carried in his body and name the heritage of his Native American ancestors. Tall, with broad shoulders molded by heavy work, he rode with a naturalness that made it seem like he had been born glued to the animal's back. His tanned skin, burned by the Texas sun, contrasted with the green eyes inherited from some European ancestor lost in his family's history. His black hair, a little too long for the region's standards, swayed loose in the wind, and when he smiled upon seeing her on the porch, Emily felt something stir deep in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't experienced in so long that it almost scared her. "Good afternoon, teacher," he said, removing his leather hat in a courtesy that seemed ancient and at the same time charged with an intimacy that shouldn't exist between them. His voice was deep, measured with the drawn-out accent typical of the region. "I came to get some books for Annie." Annie was his niece, an 8-year-old girl who had lived with him since her parents had died in a road accident 2 years before. She was one of Emily's most intelligent students, but also one of the shyest, always sitting in the back of the classroom, observing everything with those big dark eyes that reminded her too much of her uncle's. "Of course," Emily replied, standing up and smoothing her skirt, suddenly conscious that she had opened her blouse too much. "I'll get them." When she returned with the textbooks, Jackson had dismounted and tied his horse to the low fence that separated the yard from the road. He was standing at the small wooden gate, and his proximity made her notice details that disturbed her. The smell of leather and clean sweat that emanated from his skin, the way his chest muscles outlined under the plaid shirt opened to the 3rd button, the large calloused hands that held the hat with an almost feminine delicacy. "Annie is a special girl," Emily said, handing him the books and trying to keep her voice steady. "Very intelligent. She should continue her studies in the city." Jackson smiled, and the smile completely transformed his face, revealing white teeth and a dimple on the left side that made him look younger. "That's what I always tell her. But the city isn't a place for people like us, teacher." There was something in the way he pronounced "people like us" that made Emily shiver. A mixture of pride and resignation, as if he knew exactly his place in the world and accepted it without bitterness, but also without illusions. "Why not?" she asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. Jackson looked her in the eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived in the district, Emily felt truly seen. Not as the teacher, not as the abandoned woman who had fled from the capital, but as Emily, simply Emily. Because in the city, teacher, people are valued for what they have, not for what they are. And He paused, his eyes quickly scanning her face before returning to hers. "I only have these hands and a piece of land that isn't even mine." The brutal honesty of the response disarmed her. For 3 years, Emily had grown accustomed to the superficial conversations of the residents, always respectful, always maintaining the appropriate distance between her and them. But Jackson spoke as if he had known her for years, as if he had the right to be sincere with her. "Whose land is it?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Colonel Augustus's, like almost everything here." The change in Jackson's tone was subtle, but Emily perceived it. There was something there, an untold story, a poorly healed wound. "My grandfather worked these lands his whole life, my father too. Now it's me. One day, God willing, it will be the son I'm still going to have." The mention of future children made her look away, the old pain of infertility manifesting as a stab in her chest. Jackson must have noticed because his voice became softer when he continued. "I apologize, teacher, that wasn't my intention." "You don't need to apologize," she interrupted, forcing a smile. It's getting late. Shouldn't you be heading back?" He nodded, but didn't move immediately. They stood there, separated only by the low gate, looking at each other in a strange and dangerous intimacy. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky in orange and pink tones, and the golden light made Jackson's green eyes shine like precious stones. "Teacher," he said finally, his voice low and charged with something she couldn't decipher, "if you ever need anything at all, just send word." "Thank you," she murmured, feeling her cheeks blush for no apparent reason. Jackson put his hat back on his head, stored the books in the leather bag he carried tied to his saddle, and mounted his horse with a fluid movement. Before leaving, he turned to her once more. "Emily," he said, and her name sounded different on his lips, more intimate, more charged with meaning. "It's a beautiful name. It suits you." And before she could respond, he spurred his horse and left, leaving only a cloud of red dust and the echo of her name pronounced in that way that made her heart race. That night, Emily couldn't sleep, lying in the narrow bed, looking at the ceiling where a gecko hunted mosquitoes. She couldn't get Jackson out of her mind, the way he had looked at her, how he had pronounced her name, the dangerous intimacy of those few minutes at the gate. It had been years since a man had looked at her that way, as if she were desirable, as if she were a real woman. She got up and went to the window, observing the full moon that illuminated the infinite plain. Somewhere, a few kilometers away, was Jackson also looking at this same moon, thinking of her as she was thinking of him. The idea was absurd, of course. She was the teacher, he was just a rural worker. She came from the city, from a family that had once been important. He was exactly the type of man her family would despise. But there was something about him, a natural dignity, a silent strength that attracted her in a way she couldn't explain. In the days that followed, Emily found herself looking out the school window whenever she heard the sound of hooves on the road. But Jackson didn't appear. Annie continued coming to classes, brought by the neighbor who lived near the property where they lived, but there was no sign of her uncle. It was only on Thursday of the following week that she saw him again. She was organizing the books in the small school library when she heard voices in the courtyard. Through the window, she saw Annie talking animatedly with a group of classmates, pointing at something. When Emily followed the direction of the girl's finger, she saw him. Jackson was on the other side of the fence that separated the school from the neighboring property, fixing the barbed wire fence that had been damaged by cattle. He had taken off his shirt because of the heat, and Emily held her breath seeing his bare torso, the back muscles contracting with each movement, sweat making his tanned skin shine under the strong sun. As if feeling the weight of her gaze, he turned and saw her at the window. For a moment, they just looked at each other through the dusty glass, and Emily felt her face burn with shame for being caught watching him. But Jackson smiled in that way that transformed his entire face and waved at her with his free hand. Without thinking much, she left the school and walked to the fence. There was no one else in the courtyard. The children had gone home, and Annie was talking with the neighbor who had come to pick her up. "Good afternoon," she said, trying to sound casual. "Good afternoon, teacher." Jackson had put his shirt back on, but left it open, and Emily had to make a conscious effort to keep her eyes on his face. "How is Annie doing in classes?" "Very well. She's an exceptional girl." Emily hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. "Can I ask a personal question?" Jackson stopped working and approached the fence, getting so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Of course. Why do you take care of her? Don't you have other relatives?" Jackson's face darkened slightly. "I did, but when my sister and brother-in-law died, the other relatives thought she would be a burden, another mouth to feed. I couldn't let that happen." The simple and direct answer touched something deep in Emily's heart. There was a nobility in that man that went far beyond his social status, a decency that made other men seem small in comparison. "It must be difficult," she said softly, "raising a child alone." "Sometimes." Jackson looked at her intensely, as if trying to decipher something in her face. "But she teaches me a lot. Makes me want to be a better man." There was something in the way he said that made Emily wonder if he was talking only about Annie. The silence stretched between them, charged with a tension she didn't know how to name. "Teacher," Jackson said finally, his voice low and hesitant. "Can I ask you a question too?" She nodded, not trusting her own voice. "Why did a woman like you end up in a place like this?" The question was simple, but the answer was too complex to be given there, standing beside a barbed wire fence, with the sun setting behind him, creating a golden halo in his dark hair. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "we need to get lost to find ourselves." Jackson nodded as if he understood perfectly. "That's true. I've gotten lost a few times myself." "And did you find yourself?" He looked her in the eyes, and this time didn't look away. "I think I'm starting to find myself now." Emily's heart accelerated so much that she was sure he could hear it. Something was happening there, something that went far beyond a casual conversation between the teacher and a local resident. Something dangerous and tempting at the same time. "Uncle Jackson!" Annie's voice broke the moment like a dry branch. "Mrs. Grace said we have to go." Jackson stepped away from the fence, but his eyes remained fixed on Emily's. "I have to go," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "But I enjoyed talking with you." "Me too," she admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. Jackson smiled once more, that smile that completely disarmed her, and walked away to get Annie. Emily stood there long after they left, looking at the empty road and wondering what was happening to her. That night, for the first time in 3 years, she truly looked at herself in the mirror. She saw the brown hair she had pulled into a severe bun, the gray eyes that seemed to have lost their shine, the mouth that had forgotten how to smile. She saw a 35-year-old woman who had given up being a woman. But there was something different now. A spark in her eyes, a flush in her cheeks that hadn't been there the week before. Jackson had awakened something in her, something she thought was dead forever. And that scared her as much as it attracted her. The following week brought the first rains of the season, transforming the dirt roads into red mud pits, and forcing a cramped intimacy among the residents of Harmony. The school had to close for 2 consecutive days, because the children who came from the more distant ranches couldn't cross the streams that had overflowed. Emily used the free time to better organize the library and prepare the following week's lessons, but mainly to try to put her thoughts in order. Since the meeting at the fence, Jackson hadn't left her mind. At night, when the rain drummed on the zinc roof of her small house, she found herself imagining how it would feel to have those calloused hands on her skin, how it would be to kiss that mouth that smiled so disconcertingly. During the day, while correcting the children's tests, she got distracted thinking about the way he had pronounced her name, loading it with an intimacy that had no right to exist. It was on Thursday afternoon, when it finally stopped raining and a timid sun appeared between the clouds, that fate decided to test her more directly. Emily was in the kitchen preparing tea when she heard knocks on the front door. They weren't the polite knocks of the local residents, but urgent, desperate pounding. When she opened the door, she found Annie soaked from head to toe, trembling with cold and fear, her big eyes wide with panic. "Teacher!" the girl sobbed, throwing herself into her arms. "Uncle Jackson! He's hurt!" Emily's heart raced. "What happened, dear? Where is he?" "At home," Annie sniffled, clinging to Emily's skirt like it was a lifeline. "The horse slipped in the mud and fell on top of him. He can't move properly and there's a lot of blood." Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed the first aid kit she always kept at home, a remnant from the times when she dreamed of being a nurse before getting married, and followed Annie down the muddy trail that led to the property where Jackson lived. The 20-minute walk seemed endless, with Annie constantly pulling her hand, urging her to walk faster. Jackson's house was simple, but well cared for. Whitewashed adobe walls, red ceramic roof, and a small porch with 2 wooden chairs. What impressed her was the cleanliness and organization of the place, the well-tended plant pots on the porch, the clean curtains in the windows. It wasn't the house of a careless man. Annie led her directly to the back room, and Emily had to suppress a scream upon seeing Jackson. He was lying in bed, shirtless, with a deep cut on his right shoulder that was still bleeding and a huge purple bruise on the left side of his chest. He was conscious, but clearly in pain, his face pale, contrasting with his normally tanned skin. "Emily," he said when he saw her enter, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "Annie shouldn't have bothered you." "Shut up," she said with more firmness than she felt, placing the kit on the floor and kneeling beside the bed. "Let me see this." Her hands trembled slightly when they touched his skin for the first time. Jackson was warm, and she could feel his heart beating fast under her fingers as she examined the wounds. The cut on his shoulder was ugly, but didn't seem to have hit anything vital. His ribs also seemed intact, despite the impressive bruise. "You'll need stitches," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "And a doctor should examine your ribs." "There's no doctor here," Jackson said, trying to lean on his elbows and grimacing in pain. "The nearest one is in Austin, 4 hours from here." "Then you'll have to trust me." Emily gently pushed him back onto the bed. "Annie, dear, I need you to get clean water and some cloths, and see if there's whiskey in the house." "Whiskey?" Jackson raised an eyebrow, and even hurt he managed to sketch a half-smile. "To disinfect," she clarified, trying to ignore how that smile affected her. "Unless you have medical alcohol hidden somewhere. There's a bottle in the kitchen," he said, watching her as she opened the first aid kit. "Emily, thank you." She stopped what she was doing and looked at him. There was something in the way he had said thank you that went far beyond gratitude for taking care of his wounds. It was as if he was thanking her for being there, for caring, for treating him like a human being who deserved care. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "It's what anyone would do." "No," he said, his green eyes fixed on hers. "It's not what anyone would do. Most people from the city wouldn't even step foot here." The painful truth of those words hung in the air between them. Emily knew he was right. If any of the important families from Dallas knew she was there, alone in a rural worker's house, taking care of his wounds, the scandal would be immense. But strangely, that didn't bother her as much as it should. Annie returned with the water and cloths, and also with the bottle of whiskey. Emily sent the girl to the kitchen to prepare tea while she took care of Jackson's wounds. The forced intimacy of the situation, her kneeling beside the bed, leaning over his bare torso, gently cleaning the blood from his skin, created a palpable tension in the air. "This is going to hurt," she warned before pouring the whiskey over the cut. Jackson gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound, just closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Emily worked carefully, cleaning the wound and then stitching it with a skill that surprised her. It had been years since she had done this, but her hands seemed to remember the movements. "Where did you learn this?" Jackson asked, watching her work. "I wanted to be a nurse when I was younger," she replied without looking up. Before life took another turn." "And what made you change your mind?" Emily hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer involved talking about her marriage, about how she had abandoned her dreams to follow the plans her husband had for her. "I married too young," she said finally. "And my husband thought married women didn't need to work." "Idiot," Jackson murmured, and the spontaneity of the response made her laugh. "Yes," she agreed, finishing the stitches. He really was. When she finished caring for the wounds, a strange intimacy had been established between them. Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, and Jackson had propped himself up on the pillows, watching her put the materials away in the kit. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with a tension that neither of them knew how to handle. "Emily," he said finally, his voice low. "Can I ask a question?" She nodded, not trusting her own voice. "Why did your husband leave you?" "Really?" The question caught her off guard. For 3 years, she had given vague answers whenever someone asked about her past. But there was something in the way Jackson asked, without judgment, just genuine curiosity. That made her want to be honest. "Because I couldn't give him children," she said, the words coming out lower than she intended. "And because he found someone who could." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. When he spoke again, there was contained anger in his voice. "He said that to you? That it was your fault?" "Not in so many words, but—" Emily shrugged, trying to seem indifferent. The result was the same. "Emily, look at me." His voice was firm, and she reluctantly obeyed. "You know it wasn't your fault, right? These things, sometimes they just don't happen. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you." The simple words touched a wound she thought was healed. For years she had carried guilt and shame like a second skin, truly believing there was something fundamentally wrong with her. Hearing Jackson say otherwise, with such conviction, made her eyes fill with tears. "Hey," he said softly, extending his hand to touch her face. The touch was light, just his fingers brushing her cheek, but it was enough to make her break down. The tears came all at once, years of repressed pain and humiliation flowing like a dam that had burst. Jackson, despite the pain from his wounds, pulled her close, and she found herself nestled against his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin and the masculine scent of his body. "Sorry," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I didn't want to. Shouldn't be doing this." "Shh," he murmured, running his hand through her hair that had come loose from its bun. "You can cry here. You can be yourself here." The words made her cry even more, because it had been so long since she had allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of someone. They stayed like that for several minutes, her crying against his chest, him making gentle circles on her back with his hand, whispering words of comfort in her ear. When the tears finally stopped, Emily realized the position she was in, practically lying on top of Jackson, her face inches from his, feeling his breath on her skin. She should pull away, she knew that, but her body seemed to have a will of its own. "Emily," Jackson whispered, and there was something different in his voice now, something deeper, more charged with desire. She raised her face to look at him and got lost in the green eyes that watched her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Slowly, as if in a trance, she leaned toward him and their lips touched in a soft, hesitant kiss. The kiss lasted only a few seconds before both realized what was happening. Emily pulled away abruptly, her face burning with shame and desire. Sorry," she stammered, quickly getting up from the bed. "I shouldn't. That was totally inappropriate." "Emily, wait." Jackson tried to get up, but the pain made him stop. "No," she said, hastily gathering her kit. "This can't happen. I'm the teacher, you are—" We are what?" he asked, and there was a hardness in his voice she hadn't heard before. "Different? Is that it?" The question stopped her at the bedroom door. She turned to look at him, seeing the pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "It's not that," she said quietly. "Then what is it?" Emily looked at him, wounded, vulnerable, but still strong and dignified, and knew she didn't have an answer that made sense. What was it exactly? Prejudice? Fear of what others would say? Or simply terror of allowing herself to feel something again? "I need to go," she said finally. "Annie can stay with me tonight if you want, until you feel better." Jackson nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on her. "Thank you," he said, and this time the words sounded cold, formal. Emily left the room with a heavy heart, knowing she had hurt something precious, but not knowing how to fix it. Annie was in the kitchen, preparing tea as she had been instructed, and readily accepted the invitation to spend the night at the teacher's house. That night, lying in her bed while Annie slept on the living room sofa, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. It had been soft, tender, but charged with a promise that scared her. It had been years since she had kissed anyone, and she had never kissed someone like Jackson. someone who made her feel truly alive. The next day, when Annie returned home, she brought news that Jackson was better, but also a message. He no longer needed her to worry about him. The message was delivered with the innocence typical of a child, but Emily understood the subtext. He was hurt, and rightfully so. For the next 2 weeks, she saw him only from a distance. Jackson returned to work as soon as he could move his right arm without excessive pain, but carefully avoided the area near the school. Annie continued coming to classes normally, but no longer mentioned her uncle, and Emily didn't have the courage to ask. It was Mrs. Grace, the neighbor who sometimes picked up Annie from school, who brought the first gossip. One afternoon, while waiting for the girl to finish organizing her notebooks, the woman approached Emily with that air of someone who has important information to share. "Teacher," she said in a confidential tone, "did you know that Colonel Augustus is thinking about selling the lands where Jackson works?" Emily's heart tightened. "Selling? To whom?" "To a soybean company from Houston. They say they want to tear everything down and plant only soybeans." Mrs. Grace shook her head disapprovingly. "It's going to end the way of life of many good people. And Jackson? What's going to happen to him? Oh, poor boy." "They say they offered him work at the company, but it would be in the city, in some office. Can you imagine a man like that locked between 4 walls?" The woman laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "He was born on this land, teacher. Taking him away from here is like uprooting a tree." That night, Emily couldn't concentrate on anything. The idea of Jackson being forced to leave Harmony, of never seeing him again, was more painful than it had a right to be. She had spent weeks trying to convince herself that what had happened between them had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But the possibility of losing him forever made her realize the truth. She was in love with him. The awareness of this truth scared her as much as it freed her. For 3 years, she had hidden behind the mask of the respectable teacher, denying any desire, any basic human need. But Jackson had awakened something in her that she could no longer ignore. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, after leaving the children in supervised recess, she walked determinedly to Jackson's property. She found him fixing the corral fence, the same work that had injured him weeks before. He saw her approaching and stopped what he was doing, but didn't smile. "Teacher," he said formally, "did something happen to Annie?" "No," she replied, stopping a few meters from him. "I came to talk to you." "About what?" The coldness in his voice hurt her, but she understood. She had been the one who had pulled away, who had rejected what was being born between them. "About that day," she said, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "About the kiss." Jackson remained motionless, watching her. "What about it?" "I was scared," she admitted, the words coming out harder than expected. "Scared of what people would say, scared of getting hurt again, scared of feeling. And now? Now I know I'd rather be scared and alive than safe and dead inside." She took a step toward him. "I heard you might have to leave Harmony." "Mrs. Grace has a very loose tongue," he said, but the tone had softened slightly. "Is it true?" Jackson sighed, dropping the tool he was holding. "Probably. The colonel wants the money and I don't have a way to compete with a soybean company." "What if you had a reason to stay?" "To fight? What kind of reason?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she possessed. "Me," she said simply. "I could be your reason." The silence that followed seemed eternal. Jackson watched her as if trying to decipher whether she was serious, if it wasn't some kind of cruel joke. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "Emily, do you know what you're saying? I know I want to find out what could be between us. I know that when I think of you leaving, my chest hurts in a way I can't explain. And I know that kiss," she paused, feeling her cheeks blush, "was the first time in years that I felt truly alive." Jackson took 2 long steps toward her, and suddenly he was so close that she could see the small scars on his face, feel the heat of his body. "Are you sure?" he asked, raising his hand to touch her face. "Because if we start this, Emily, there's no going back." "I'm not the type of man who gives up easily." In response, she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting the sensation of being touched with tenderness envelop her completely. "I'm sure," she whispered. And this time, when he kissed her, she didn't pull away. The days that followed Emily's declaration were like living in 2 different worlds. During the day, she maintained the facade of the respectable teacher, fulfilling her obligations at school, grading tests, and giving classes as she always had. But when the sun set and the children returned to their homes, another Emily emerged. A woman who had rediscovered the pleasure of being desired, of being a woman. Jackson began visiting her discreetly, always with some plausible excuse. He brought vegetables from the garden, came to get school supplies for Annie, offered help to fix something in the house. But the looks they exchanged, the apparently casual touches when he passed near her, the way he pronounced her name loaded with unspoken promises, all of this created a constant tension that consumed them from within. It was on a Friday afternoon, when Annie had stayed at a classmate's house for a school project, that Jackson appeared at her door with the pretext of checking if the roof had been damaged by the heavy rain the night before. Emily knew it was just an excuse, just as he knew that she knew, but neither of them said anything. He climbed onto the roof with a borrowed ladder, made noise up there for a few minutes, then came down and declared that everything was in order. When she offered coffee as thanks, the formality between them finally dissolved. "Emily," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway, "I can't keep pretending I come here just to check roofs." "I know," she replied without turning to look at him, pretending to be busy preparing the coffee. "I also can't keep pretending I'm not waiting for you to show up." The silence that followed was charged with electric tension. Emily could feel Jackson approaching from behind, even without seeing him. When he placed his hands on her shoulders, she shivered all over. "Look at me," he said quietly. She turned slowly, and when their eyes met, she saw there a desire so intense that it made her feel weak in the knees. Without saying a word, Jackson raised his hand and caressed her face, running down through the hair she had left loose for the first time in a long time. "You're beautiful," he murmured, as if discovering this for the first time. "I don't know how someone was able to let you go." Before she could respond, he kissed her. But this time it wasn't the hesitant kiss charged with guilt from the first time. It was a hungry, desperate kiss, as if they had been drowning and had finally found air. Emily's hands grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, and she felt she could collapse right there, in his arms. When they separated, both were breathless. Jackson pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed, as if trying to control himself. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse, "if we don't stop now..." "What if I don't want to stop?" she interrupted, surprising herself with her own audacity. His eyes opened, searching hers. "Are you sure?" In response, she took his hand and led him into the house, down the narrow hallway to her room. It was a simple room, with an iron bed, an old wardrobe, and a vanity inherited from her mother. But when Jackson kissed her again there, against the closed door, the room transformed into the most sacred place in the world. They made love slowly, as if they had all the time in the universe. Jackson's hands explored every curve of Emily's body with a reverence that made her cry, not from sadness, but from a happiness so intense it hurt. It had been so long since she felt desired, since she felt like a woman, that every touch, every kiss, every sigh from him was like a resurrection. Afterward, lying naked between the rumpled sheets, she traced with her finger the scars on his chest. Some old, others more recent. "Each one has a story," he said, taking her hand and kissing the palm. "Someday I'll tell you all of them." "We have time," she replied, nestling against him. "I hope so," Jackson murmured, but there was something in his voice that made her raise her head to look at him. "What is it?" He hesitated, as if deciding whether or not to tell her. "Colonel Augustus came to see me yesterday. The land sale is almost closed. I have until the end of the month to decide what I'm going to do." Emily's heart tightened. "And what do you want to do?" "I want to stay," he said without hesitation. "I want to fight for this land, for Annie, for..." He looked at her intensely. "For us. But I don't know if it's going to be possible." "Why not?" Jackson sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Because I don't have money to buy the land. And because the colonel made it very clear that people like me don't have choices. We accept what they offer us, or we're left with nothing." The anger Emily felt was so intense it surprised her. "People like you? What does that mean?" "You know what it means, Emily. I'm mixed race, poor, without an important family. To men like Colonel Augustus, I'm nothing more than cheap labor." "That's unfair," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "It's life," he replied with a bitterness that hurt her. "It's always been like this." "No," she said firmly, sitting up in bed. "It doesn't have to be like this. There must be a way." "Emily," Jackson sat up too, pulling her close. "I don't want you to worry about this. It's not your problem." "How is it not my problem?" she retorted, turning to face him. "If you leave, what will become of us?" "I don't know," he admitted, and the brutal honesty of the response was worse than any consoling lie. That night after Jackson left, Emily stayed awake thinking. There was an obvious solution to his problem. She had some money saved, the inheritance she had received when her father died. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough to make an offer to the colonel. The problem was that using that money would mean publicly assuming her relationship with Jackson, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the consequences. The answer came sooner than expected. On the following Monday, when she arrived at school, she found the regional education director waiting for her. Mrs. Victoria was a 60-year-old woman, severe and conservative, who controlled all the rural schools in the region with an iron fist. "Teacher Emily," she said without preamble, "we need to talk." The tone left no doubt that it wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. Emily led her inside the school, feeling her stomach churn with nervousness. "It has come to my attention," Mrs. Victoria began as soon as they sat down, "that you have been maintaining an inappropriate relationship with a local resident." Emily's blood ran cold, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Jackson River." The woman said the name as if it were a dirty word. "You've been seen entering and leaving your house at inappropriate hours. In addition, neighbors have reported intimacies." "That's ridiculous," Emily said, but her voice sounded less convincing than she would have liked. "Is it?" Mrs. Victoria leaned forward, her small eyes gleaming with malice. "Because I have here a letter signed by several respectable families in the region, questioning your moral conduct and your suitability to educate their children." Emily felt the world crumble around her. A letter, signed by 18 families, including Colonel Augustus and his wife. "They're concerned about the example you're setting for the children." The woman paused, clearly savoring the moment, especially considering that this man is known to have a violent past. "Violent? What are you talking about?" "Apparently 2 years ago he beat a man almost to death. He was only not arrested because the victim decided not to press charges." Mrs. Victoria smiled cruelly. "Is this the type of man you've chosen to associate with?" Emily felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Jackson had never mentioned anything about violence, about any problems with the law. Did she really not know him as well as she thought? "I need time to process this," she said weakly. "Of course. But I want you to know that your position here is at risk. If you decide to continue with this scandalous relationship, you'll have to look for work elsewhere. And I can guarantee that recommendation letters won't be positive." After Mrs. Victoria left, Emily spent the rest of the day in a state of shock. The children noticed she was distracted, and even Annie asked if she was feeling well. Emily didn't know what to answer. That afternoon, when Jackson appeared to pick up Annie, she was waiting for him at the school gate, her face marked by tension. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Jackson immediately noticed something was wrong. After leaving Annie at home, he returned and found Emily pacing agitatedly on her porch. "What happened?" he asked. "The regional director was here today. Someone told about us." Emily stopped pacing and faced him. 18 families signed a letter questioning my moral conduct." Jackson's face darkened. "Sons of Jackson," she interrupted him. "She said you have a violent past, that you beat a man almost to death." The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson looked away, and Emily felt her heart break a little more. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice coming out as a whisper. "Yes," he replied finally, still without looking at her. "It's true." "What do you mean it's true? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I knew you would react exactly like this." Finally he faced her, and there was deep pain in his eyes. "Because I knew this would change everything between us. Jackson, I need to know what happened. The whole truth." He sat heavily in one of the porch chairs, running his hands over his face before speaking. "It was right after Annie came to live with me. She was 6 years old and traumatized by her parents' death. One day, when I went to pick her up from school in town, I found a man touching her inappropriately." Jackson's voice became lower, charged with contained rage. She was crying, trying to get away, and he was holding her tightly. Emily felt her stomach turn. I lost control, Jackson continued. Completely. When I realized what was happening, the man was on the ground, bleeding, unconscious. If other people hadn't held me back, I would have killed him. My God, Emily murmured. The man was married, had a family, position in society. I was just a rural worker defending a child. You can imagine how the investigation went. The sarcasm in Jackson's voice was bitter. In the end, he decided not to press charges because he knew that if the case went to trial, everyone would know what he tried to do to Annie. But the damage was done. Everyone knew I was violent, dangerous. Emily sat in the chair next to him, processing the information. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wanted you to know me first. I wanted you to see who I really am before hearing the labels others put on me. He looked at her with a sadness that broke her in half. And because I knew that when you found out, you would see me differently. Jackson, see, you're already looking at me another way. He stood up, walking to the porch railing. I understand, Emily. I understand if you want me to disappear from your life. I've caused enough problems already. Emily sat there watching him. It was true that the revelation had shocked her, but not for the reasons he imagined. What shocked her was imagining what Annie had gone through, and Jackson's courage in protecting her. What shocked her was realizing that even knowing he would be judged, condemned, he hadn't hesitated to do what he thought was right. Jackson, she said, standing up and walking to him. Look at me. He turned reluctantly. You did what any decent person would do. You protected a child. She touched his face gently. That doesn't make you a violent man. It makes you an honorable man. Jackson's eyes filled with cautious hope. Even after knowing it could cost you your job, your reputation. My reputation? Emily laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Jackson, I was abandoned by my husband like old furniture. I ended up in a rural district where I'm tolerated but not accepted. What reputation is this that I should be protecting? Your job then, your independence. My job. She paused, thinking. You know what I've learned these last few days? That I spent 3 years living a life that wasn't mine, being who I thought I should be, not who I really am. And who are you really? Emily smiled for the first time since morning. I'm a woman who fell in love with a good, honorable man who protects those he loves even when it costs him dearly. She held his hands. I'm a woman who's willing to fight for what she wants. And what do you want? You, she replied without hesitation. I want you. I want Annie. I want us to stay together and face whatever comes. Jackson pulled her into his arms, kissing her with desperate intensity. When they separated, he pressed his forehead to hers. Are you sure? Because it's going to be difficult. They'll talk about us. They'll try to separate us. I'm sure, she said firmly. But first, we need to resolve the land issue. We can't build anything if you're forced to leave. Emily, I don't have a way to. I have money, she interrupted him. Not much, but maybe it's enough to make an offer to the colonel. No, Jackson said immediately. I won't let you spend your savings for my sake. It's not for your sake, she retorted. It's for our sake, for Annie, for our future. What if it doesn't work? What if he doesn't accept? You'll have lost everything. Jackson, she held his face between her hands. I've lost everything once before. I know what it's like. And I know I'd rather lose betting on love than lose out of cowardice. That night they devised a plan. Emily would make a formal offer to Colonel Augustus to buy the portion of land where Jackson worked. It wouldn't be easy. He would probably be furious to discover she was financing it, but it was the only chance they had. The next morning when Emily headed to the Colonel's ranch, she knew she was betting everything on a single card. Her career, her future, her happiness. But for the first time in years, she felt she was truly living, making choices that mattered. What she didn't know was that other forces were already in motion, and that her visit that morning would trigger a series of events that would test both their love to the limit. When she rang the doorbell of the main house, she heard heavy footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing not the Colonel, but a man who made her feel as if the world had stopped spinning. It was Robert, her ex-husband, smiling with that fake smile she knew so well. Hi, Emily, he said casually, as if they had seen each other the week before. What a nice surprise to find you here. And that's when she realized she had fallen into a trap much more elaborate than she had imagined. For a moment that seemed eternal, Emily stood paralyzed at the door of the main house, looking at Robert's face as if she were seeing a ghost. He hadn't changed much in the 3 years since he had left her. He still had that air of superiority that irritated her so much, the always impeccable suit, the slicked hair, and the calculated smile. But there was something different in his eyes, a malice she didn't remember seeing before. "Robert," she managed to say finally, her voice coming out weaker than she would have liked. "What are you doing here?" "Business, dear," he replied, and the forced familiarity in his tone made her shiver. "Colonel Augustus is a very important client of the firm. I'm here to finalize some contracts." That's when the colonel appeared behind Robert, a corpulent man in his 60s with a graying mustache and the air of someone accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question. "Teacher Emily," he said, and there was a coldness in his voice that hadn't existed in the few times they had met before. "What a surprise. Dr. Robert told me you were married." "Were," Emily corrected quickly. "We were married. Now we're divorced." "Ah, yes, divorced," the colonel repeated, as if the word left a bitter taste in his mouth. "What a shame. Dr. Robert told me very interesting things about you." Emily's stomach contracted. "What kind of things?" Come in," the colonel said, making way. "Let's talk in a civilized manner." Emily hesitated, all her instincts screaming for her to flee from there. But she knew that if she backed down now, she would lose any chance of saving Jackson's land. With her heart beating irregularly, she entered the main house. The main room was opulent, full of solid wood furniture, Persian rugs, and hunting trophies on the walls. Robert served himself whiskey as if he were at home, while the colonel settled into a leather armchair, gesturing for Emily to sit on the sofa in front of him. "So," the colonel began, "Robert told me you've developed, let's say, questionable habits since you moved here." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't need to pretend with us, dear," Robert intervened, sitting next to her on the sofa, too close for her comfort. "Everyone knows about you and the Indian." The disdainful way he pronounced Indian made anger boil inside Emily. "Jackson isn't..." "Jackson?" Robert repeated with a cruel smile. "What an exotic name. Tell me, Emily, was it difficult to lower yourself so much? I mean, I know you were never great at those things in bed, but sleeping with a savage must have been an interesting experience." "Shut up," Emily said through gritted teeth, standing up abruptly. Calm down," the colonel intervened, clearly amused by the situation. "Let's maintain civility. Robert, tell her about our proposal." Robert also stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the infinite plain. "You see, Emily, when I found out you were here, I was worried. After all, we were married for 8 years. I have a certain responsibility for you." "You have no responsibility for me," she retorted. "Maybe not legally," he agreed, turning to face her. "But morally, well, it's embarrassing to have an ex-wife behaving like a woman of the streets." "How dare you?" "So," Robert continued, ignoring her indignation, "I proposed a solution that benefits everyone. The colonel here agrees not to proceed with his plan to fire you from school, and I offer to take you back to Dallas, where you can start over with dignity." Emily stared at him, incredulous. "You think I would go back to you after everything?" "Not to me," Robert laughed. "Please, Emily, don't be ridiculous. I'm engaged to a much younger and more suitable woman, but I can arrange a decent job for you in the capital, maybe at a private school where no one knows your recent past. And in exchange, you stop this charade of dating the rural worker and get out of his life forever. Simple as that." The room fell silent for several seconds. Emily looked from Robert to the colonel, finally understanding the trap she had fallen into. It wasn't a coincidence that Robert was there. Everything had been planned. "It was you," she said slowly, the pieces fitting together in her mind. "You orchestrated all of this. The letter from the families, the dismissal threat, the land sale." Robert smiled, clearly satisfied that she had figured it out. "It took you a while to understand, but you got there." "Yes. When I found out through some contacts that my ex-wife was getting involved with a half-breed in Harmony, I thought I should intervene. Imagine the embarrassment for my family, for my business." "You son of a..." "Emily," the colonel interrupted her, his voice cutting. I suggest you accept the proposal. It's generous considering the circumstances. And if I don't accept, then you'll be fired tomorrow, Robert replied coldly. And I'll make sure you never get a job at any school in the state again. Besides, the colonel here has some plans for your little boyfriend. What kind of plans? Well, the colonel stood up, walking to a desk where he picked up a folder. It turns out we've received reports that Jackson River has been hunting illegally on our lands. Just yesterday, my foreman found evidence. Footprints, fire remains, animal carcasses. That's a lie, Emily said, but her voice came out less convincing than she would have liked. Is it? Well, the police won't think it's a lie when they find a rifle hidden in his house. A rifle that coincidentally was used in a crime a few years ago in Houston. The threat was clear, and Emily felt cold terror spreading through her chest. They were willing to frame Jackson with false evidence if she didn't cooperate. You're monsters, she whispered. We're practical men, the colonel corrected, and we're offering an honorable way out for everyone. You go back to the city, start your life over, and the Indian remains free to work somewhere else. And if I say no, then your boyfriend goes to jail, Annie becomes an orphan again, and you're left unemployed with a destroyed reputation, Robert enumerated casually. Doesn't seem like a good trade. Emily sat down again, feeling the weight of the situation. They had prepared a perfect trap, using her love for Jackson against herself. If she tried to fight, they would destroy both him and her. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Robert smiled. You have until tomorrow morning. My car will pass by your house at 8 o'clock. If you're ready to come with me, great. If not, he shrugged meaningfully. Emily left the main house in a state of total shock. The walk back to the district seemed to last hours, her mind spinning in circles, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. How could she have been so naive? How hadn't she realized that everything was happening too fast, too organized? When she got home, she found Jackson waiting for her on the porch, Annie playing in the yard with a cornhusk doll. The normalcy of the scene made her want to cry. How did it go? Jackson asked as soon as he saw her, but the smile died on his lips when he noticed her expression. Emily, what happened? She told him everything, about Robert, about the plan, about the threats. Jackson listened in silence, his face becoming increasingly somber with each word. Sons of bitches, he murmured when she finished. So it was all a setup from the beginning. Jackson, they're going to plant false evidence in your house. They're going to frame you for illegal hunting, maybe for other crimes. Let them try, he said, but Emily could see the concern in his eyes. No, she held his hands. You have Annie to think about. If you're arrested, what will happen to her? And you think I'm going to let them blackmail you? Maybe it's the only way out. No, Jackson said firmly. I won't let you sacrifice your happiness for me. Not again. Jackson, Emily, listen. If you go back to Dallas because of me, I'll never forgive myself, and neither will you. We'll find another way. That night they stayed awake until late, trying to devise a plan. But no matter what angle they looked at the situation from, it seemed impossible. Robert and the colonel had all the cards in their hand. It was Annie who, inadvertently, gave them the answer. The next morning, when she was helping Emily prepare coffee, the girl mentioned casually, Aunt Emily, yesterday I saw the man from the city hiding something in our yard. Emily and Jackson exchanged glances. What man, dear? Emily asked, trying to keep her voice calm. That one in the suit. He arrived in a black car when Uncle Jackson went to take the cattle to pasture. He dug up something near the mango tree and buried it again. The rifle. Robert had planted the evidence the night before, preparing everything for the ambush. Annie, Jackson knelt in front of his niece. Are you sure of what you saw? I'm sure. I even thought it was strange because he kept looking around, as if he was doing something wrong. An idea began to form in Emily's mind. It was risky, maybe impossible, but it was the only chance they had. Jackson, she said, what if we could prove that Robert planted the evidence? If we had a confession? How? Leave it to me, she said, iron determination taking hold of her. But I need you to trust me, no matter what happens. Emily, I won't let you put yourself in danger. Jackson, she held his face between her hands. You said you weren't the type of man who gives up easily. Well, I'm not the type of woman who gives up easily either. Not when it comes to protecting those I love. At exactly 8 o'clock, Robert stopped in front of Emily's house with the black car. She was waiting on the porch, a small suitcase beside her. "Wise decision," he said when she approached the car. "I knew you'd end up seeing reason." "Before I go," she said, "I want you to know that I found out about the rifle." Robert frowned. "What rifle?" "The one you planted in Jackson's yard last night." "Annie saw you." For a fraction of a second, Robert seemed genuinely surprised, but quickly composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Just like you know this whole illegal hunting story is a lie." "Emily, get in the car. We don't have time for your fantasies." "They're not fantasies, Robert, and I'm not leaving until you admit what you did." "Fine," he said, the mask of civility finally falling. "Yes, I planted the rifle. Yes, I made up the illegal hunting story. So what? You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" That's when Emily showed the small recorder she had hidden in her blouse sleeve, the record button clearly visible. "You bitch," she completed. "Maybe I am, but I'm a bitch who just recorded your confession." Robert tried to grab the recorder, but Emily was faster, running toward the house where Jackson was waiting. But Robert was stronger and managed to reach her, grabbing her arm with enough force to hurt her. "Give me that damn recorder," he shouted, all facade of civility disappearing. "Take your hands off her." Jackson's voice was low, dangerous, charged with controlled fury that made Robert shiver. He was standing a few meters from them, and Emily could see he was making an immense effort to control himself. The boyfriend arrived," Robert said, but his tremulous voice revealed he was scared. "How romantic." "I said take your hands off her," Jackson repeated, taking a step forward. Robert let go of Emily abruptly, but tried to snatch the recorder from her hands. That's when Jackson lost control. In 3 long steps, he was on Robert. It wasn't blind violence like the previous time, it was surgical precision. A precise punch to the stomach that left Robert breathless, followed by an arm lock that completely immobilized him. "The lady asked if you planted evidence on my property," Jackson said calmly, twisting Robert's arm just enough to cause pain. "I don't think I heard the answer."
"Yes!"
Robert screamed.
"Yes, I planted it! Now let me go!"
"And the illegal hunting story?"
"It's a lie! All lies! Let me go, please!"
Jackson released him with a push that made Robert fall to the ground. "Now get out of my sight before I forget that Annie is watching." Robert got up staggering, looking with hatred at both of them. "You think you've won, but you haven't won anything. I'll still destroy you both." "No," a new voice intervened. "I don't think you will." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Victoria walking toward them, accompanied by 2 police officers and Colonel Augustus. But the colonel didn't look pleased at all. "Teacher Emily," Mrs. Victoria said, "when we received your call this morning and heard the recording you sent us, we decided it was time for a more thorough investigation." "What recording?" Robert asked, confused. "The recording of yesterday's conversation at the colonel's house," Emily explained. "I wasn't just taking mental notes. My cell phone was recording the whole time." Robert's face paled. "Dr. Robert," one of the police officers approached. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, blackmail, trespassing, and falsifying evidence." While Robert was handcuffed and taken to the patrol car, the colonel approached Emily and Jackson. He seemed to have aged 10 years in an hour. "Teacher," he said, his voice heavy with embarrassment, "I apologize. When Dr. Robert approached me with that story, I let my prejudices speak louder than good sense." "And the lands?" Jackson asked. "The lands." The colonel hesitated. "Well, I discovered this morning that the soybean company was actually a front for one of Robert's dirty businesses. With him arrested, the deal obviously won't happen anymore." "So Jackson can stay?" Emily asked. "He can stay. And more than that." The colonel took an envelope from his pocket. "I'm offering to sell the property for a fair price. Jackson, your grandfather and your father worked this land for decades. It's fair that it should be yours." 3 months later, Emily was on the porch of the house that was now officially theirs, watching Jackson and Annie play in the yard. The wedding had been simple, celebrated in the district church with the entire community present. Mrs. Victoria, in a surprising turn, had even offered a transfer so Emily could work at a better school in Austin, but she had refused. Harmony was her home now. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, sitting next to her on the porch. "About how everything has changed," she replied, nestling against him. "6 months ago, I was completely lost. Now I know exactly who I am and where I want to be." "And where is that?" Emily smiled, placing her hand over her belly that was beginning to show the first signs of a new life growing inside her. The miracle that doctors said was impossible, but that love had made real. "Here," she said simply. "With you, with Annie, with our family. Here, where I finally learned that true love isn't the one that keeps us safe and comfortable. It's the one that makes us brave enough to fight for it." Jackson kissed the top of her head, and in the silence of the Texas afternoon, lulled by the sound of birds and wind in the trees, they knew they had found something that no external force could destroy. A love that had been tested by fire and had come out stronger on the other side. And when Annie ran to them shouting, "Mommy, Emily, look what I found," showing a wildflower she had picked in the field, Emily knew her life was finally complete. The desert had transformed into a garden, and she would never be the same.